Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1586, Crystal Race. That night, Xianxia showed up as promised and chatted with Han Li for the entire night. Han Li obtained a lot of information about Cloud City from Xianxia, and only after the sun had risen the next day did Xianxia finally take his leave. However, just as Han Li had accompanied him to the door, a thought seemed to have suddenly occurred to him, and he abruptly turned around with a hesitant look on his face as he said, "Junior Marshal Brother Han, I won't ever be able to return to human territory, but that possibility is still alive for you. If there ever comes a day when you want to leave Cloud City and go somewhere far away, please come to visit me first. I have some things to give to you, as well as a request I'd like to make, but rest assured, you'll be able to complete my request with ease as long as you can make it back to the human race, and doing so will also be immensely beneficial to you." Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this, and after a brief pause, he asked, "Oh? Can't you just tell me your request now? I really can't say for sure when I'd be looking to leave this city. If an emergency strikes, I may not be able to go and visit you before I leave. Truth be told, I can't disclose these matters to you right now, and it'll take me some time to prepare some things. It would be best if you could come and visit me before your departure. Otherwise, I think you and I will both regret it," Xianxia replied with a meaningful shake of his head. Thus, Han Li promised that he would do his best to visit Xianxia prior to his departure, and only then did Xianxia nod before departing from the room. Han Li looked on as Xianxia left, and a peculiar look appeared on his face. All of a sudden, he made a grabbing motion toward the door of his room, and an immense force erupted forth, instantly shutting the door again. At the same time, white light flashed from the walls within the room as the restriction within was activated, encapsulating the entire room. Han Li then strode over to a corner of the room before sitting down in a cross-legged manner on the futon that had been prepared there. It was unclear exactly what he was thinking, but a faint smile had appeared on his face while a cold light flashed through his eyes. The next day, Han Li continued to meditate in his room, showing no intention of going anywhere. Only on the morning of the third day was the door of the room finally opened, and he emerged from within in an unhurried manner. However, instead of going downstairs to the hall to find Xianxia, he left the inn through the exit on this level before drifting lightly down onto the streets outside. Han Li seemed to have already decided where he wanted to go, and he casually hailed a beast-drawn carriage and gave the driver a destination before setting off. Through the window of the carriage, Han Li could see everything on the streets outside. His heart stirred slightly as he cast his gaze toward the massive balls outside the city walls. Following his lengthy conversation with Xianxia the night before, he had learned just what these massive balls were. It turned out that these were 13 super-massive puppets, each of which was comparable in power to an early body integration stage being. Each of the 13 heavenly cloud races controlled one puppet, and it was quite clear just from those fearsome puppets just how stalwart the defenses of Cloud City were. It was no wonder that this city was designated to be the central hub for the resistance against the Jiao Kai race. At the very least, it would almost be impossible to launch an effective sneak attack on this city. Han Li quickly withdrew his gaze from the balls in the distance before closing his eyes. The place that he was traveling to wasn't very far away, so the beast-drawn carriage arrived at his destination after only an hour or so. Han Li casually tossed a few spirit stones toward the driver before disembarking the carriage and surveying his surroundings. The street before him appeared to be quite mundane, but there were far more people here than even on the main streets. The shops on either side of the street weren't very large, but business seemed to be booming for them as many customers were regularly entering and exiting the shops. Han Li nodded as he cast his gaze toward the shop that stood right before him. He glanced up at the plaque hanging above the entrance, then immediately strode in an expressionless manner. The shop was several hundred feet in size, and it was filled with rows of shelves, upon which were placed all types of items such as stone tablets, jade plates, silver badges, and ancient tomes. However, all of those items had been concealed under a shimmering light barrier. This was a shop that specialized in selling tomes. According to Xianxia, these types of shops couldn't be more common in Cloud City, but the few renowned shops that Han Li was interested in were all gathered on this street. Now that he had arrived, it appeared that Xianxia's claims rang true. The shop wasn't very large, but it really did contain many tomes of all different types. There were a few other foreign beings who were also inspecting the wares being sold in the shop, and they were all core formation stage beings. All of these foreign beings seemed to be focused on their respective searches, and all of them failed to notice that an upper race being had just strode into the shop. As for the shopkeeper, she was a young female foreign being who appeared to be only around 17 or 18 years of age. However, her skin was as pristine and translucent as snow, and there was a pea-sized white crystal embedded on her glabella. Her beautiful eyes were also shimmering with wisdom that seemed to belie her youthful appearance. Han Li's heart stirred as he instantly identified this woman as a being of the crystal race. He had naturally done some research on the 13 heavenly cloud races, and he knew that the crystal race was one of them. However, this race was quite a peculiar one. Not only was its entire population pitifully small at only around just over 1 million, they were also predominantly weaker than beings of the other 12 races. In spite of that, all of them had extremely long lifespans that were 3 to 4 times that of a human. Furthermore, all of them were very beautiful and highly intelligent. Almost all crystal beings could reach a high level of proficiency in pill refinement, formation spells, or talisman crafting with ease. As such, the crystal race was always extremely welcomed, and even though they didn't have much interest in things like power struggles, they enjoyed quite a lofty rank among the 13 heavenly cloud races. The crystal being had also noticed Han Li, and as she cast her gaze toward him, a hint of surprise flashed through her eyes, as if she'd managed to glean his cultivation base. Thus, she immediately rose to her feet and strode over to him before extending a delicate curtsy. "Welcome to my humble shop, Upper Race Senior. Is there anything I can help you with?" The woman spoke in a refined manner, and there wasn't anything forced or over the top about her, yet she somehow exuded an air of grace and elegance. It appeared the rumors were true. The crystal race really was unlike any other race he'd seen before. Han Li clucked his tongue with wonder internally, but his expression remained unchanged as he replied, "No need. I'll have a look for myself first, and I'll inform you if I require any assistance. Then feel free to browse our wares, Senior." The crystal woman nodded in a manner that was neither humble nor arrogant, then curtsied again before leaving Han Li to his own devices. However, her words had come as quite a shock to all of the other customers in the shop. All of them hurriedly turned toward Han Li with surprised expressions on their faces before drawing a sharp breath in unison. They were naturally unable to glean Han Li's exact cultivation base, but the fact that it was so unfathomable to them indicated that Han Li was countless times more powerful than them. Thus, all of them became rather uneasy, and some of them immediately departed while others quickly picked out a few tomes before also hurrying away. In the blink of an eye, Han Li and the crystal woman were the only two beings left in the shop. Han Li paid no heed to this recent development as he made his way over to a nearby shelf to inspect the tomes that had been placed there. From the surface, Han Li naturally couldn't really see anything. Thus, he swept his spiritual sense toward one of the stone tablets on the shelf, and that was when he discovered the function of the light barrier around the shop items. Through the use of his spiritual sense, he could only glean a short string of introductory information. When he tried to inspect more of the stone tablet's contents, he encountered a slight obstruction. Of course, with his immensely powerful spiritual sense, he could naturally force his way through the restriction with ease, but doing so would undoubtedly attract the attention of the shopkeeper, and no being of any status would be willing to embarrass themselves in such a farcical manner. Han Li glanced at a few of the tomes on the shelf before him and discovered that most of them only contained some general information about the 13 heavenly cloud races, so he naturally wasn't very interested in them. Thus, he made his way over to another shelf before inspecting the tomes on there with his spiritual sense again. On this occasion, he seemed to have found what he was looking for. A short while later, a hint of elation appeared on his face, and he waved a hand toward a blue jade plate to draw it into his grasp. He then continued to search through the shop, and in the blink of an eye, he'd gathered over 20 tomes. Only then did he make his way over the crystal woman with a pleased expression on his face, and he placed everything down onto the table before him as he asked, "How many spirit stones are you charging for all this?" The crystal woman looked at the pile of tomes that had been placed before her, and a hint of surprise appeared on her face. She then suddenly smiled and said something that came as quite a surprise to Han Li. These tomes aren't worth that much. You can take them for free, Senior. Han Li faltered initially upon hearing this before his expression darkened slightly, and he asked, "Are you afraid that I won't be able to afford them?" "That was never my intention, Senior. What I'm saying is that I have something else that may be of interest to you, and if you're willing to take it, then I can give all of these tomes to you for free," the woman replied with a composed smile. "Oh, what is it that you want to show me?" Han Li asked as his expression eased slightly. "Please wait for a moment. The item in question is quite valuable, so I've stored it in the back room." The woman rose to her feet with a smile before making her way toward the rear of the store. Han Li merely waited in silence on the spot, and moments later, the woman emerged with a black metal box. There were 2 azure talismans plastered over the surface of the box in a crisscross formation, indicating that the box was housing something very important. "Please take a look at the item in the box, Senior. I'm sure it'll be quite useful to you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have brought it out for your inspection," the woman said with a knowing smile. Chapter 1587, Heavenly Devilish Armor. Han Li didn't waste any more time upon hearing this, and he accepted the black box before sweeping his spiritual sense toward it. Even though restriction talismans had been plastered over the box, they weren't enough to completely obstruct his spiritual sense, and he still sensed something within the box. Han Li cast his gaze toward the crystal woman with a hint of surprise on his face. "Looks like you really do know some things," Han Li said as he narrowed his eyes. "I'm working off a lot of assumptions as well, so I certainly can't say that I know everything. Why don't you open the box to see if the item inside interests you?" "This is not a good place to talk. Let's go elsewhere first," the woman said with a smile. She then flipped a hand over, and a formation plate appeared over her palm. She glanced at the entrance of the shop before making a hand seal and chanting something, then pointing a finger toward the formation plate. Brilliant light instantly flashed from the formation plate, following which a vast expanse of 5 colored lights swept forth in all directions, enshrouding Han Li and the woman within. Han Li raised an eyebrow at the sight of this sudden development. He could sense powerful spatial fluctuations from within the 5-colored light, but he remained still on the spot and made no attempt to evade. The light swirled around Han Li before forming a 5-colored light formation, and Han Li felt his surroundings abruptly blur before he found himself within a murky gray space. The space was extremely small, only just over 100 feet in size, and there was nothing in it aside from a table and a pair of chairs. At this moment, Han Li was standing atop a teleportation formation that was shimmering with 5-colored light alongside the woman. "This is a small spatial rift that I had someone open up for me. There won't be any danger of our conversation being eavesdropped on here. Of course, with your powers, even without the teleportation plate, it would be a simple task to force your way back to the original space," the crystal woman explained with an elegant smile. Han Li swept his spiritual sense toward the spatial walls around them to find that this space was indeed quite secure, and he nodded in a content manner before sweeping a sleeve over the black box in his hand. A swath of azure light immediately flashed past, and the 2 talismans detached themselves from the box while the lid was flung open. A burst of black chi immediately swept forth from within, swirling around the box before attempting to spread into the surrounding area. However, Han Li seemed to have anticipated that this would happen well in advance. He merely opened his mouth in a composed manner to expel a swath of golden light, and as soon as the black chi was swept up by this light, it transformed into a black pillar of mist that was sucked straight into Han Li's stomach. What pure devilish chi! The golden light around Han Li's body intensified in brightness as if it had been enhanced by the devilish chi he'd just swallowed. This black chi was devilish chi of an extremely high degree of purity, and for a cultivator like Han Li, who was using the Provenance True Devil Arts, he was able to convert this devilish chi into magic power as long as he didn't ingest too much of it at once. A hint of astonishment flashed through the crystal woman's eyes upon seeing this. She was well aware of just how powerful the devilish chi emanating from the item in the box was, and every time she opened the box, she would have to make extensive preparations beforehand. Otherwise, if the devilish chi were to infiltrate her body, her cultivation base would be significantly damaged, and under worst-case scenarios, so could even die. At this moment, Han Li made a grabbing motion toward the box, and a black object flew out from within before landing in his grasp. This was a suit of purple armor that was around half a foot in size. Not only was it extremely sinister in appearance, there were several spikes protruding from the shoulder and knee sections of the armor. On top of that, its entire surface was filled with black patterns, and it was emanating immensely powerful devilish qi. This was a suit of armor that had undergone devilification. However, there was a large hole on the chest of the suit of armor, and the surrounding area was riddled with cracks, clearly indicating that it had been severely damaged. Han Li stared at the suit of armor in his hand with a peculiar look on his face. With his mastery of the Provenance True Devil Arts, he could naturally sense that this suit of devilish armor contained incredible power. This was definitely the most powerful suit of armor he had ever seen, and this was even after it had sustained such severe damage. If it could be fully repaired, it would truly be an unfathomably powerful suit of armor. With that in mind, Han Li's eyes began to shimmer with intrigue as he appraised the suit of armor. This suit of devilish armor is something I just so happened to come across, and in the beginning, I didn't know what it was, either. However, after verification from many sources, I learned that this is a legendary suit of heavenly devilish armor. It appears that this is a suit of armor manifested by an extremely powerful heavenly devilish monarch. However, from the extensive damage suffered by the suit of armor, it's most likely the case that its former owner has already perished. Now, the suit of armor is most likely not even a tenth as powerful as it once was. However, if it were to be repaired, it should be able to recover around 20% to 30% of its former power, the crystal woman said with a smile. A heavenly devilish monarch? Those are devilish beings that are close to true spirit beings. It's no wonder that this suit of armor is imbued with such pure devilish qi. It's quite extraordinary that you were able to find something like this, Han Li said in a solemn manner. He then suddenly tossed the miniature suit of armor into the air before casting a golden incantation seal onto it. The golden light disappeared into the purple suit of armor in a flash, following which it expanded to several times its original size. At the same time, the devilish qi emanating from it also became more powerful, and it began to sweep through the surrounding area. The crystal woman's expression changed slightly at the sight of the black qi surging toward her, and she abruptly raised a hand to send several white talismans flying through the air. The talismans then exploded to form a white light barrier that shielded her within. A strange sizzling sound rang out as the devilish qi made contact with the light barrier, but it was kept at bay in the end. A hint of a smile appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this. He abruptly made a hand seal, and brilliant golden light erupted from his body as golden halo emerged above his head, within which a projection with 3 heads and 6 arms gradually surfaced. The 3 heads of the projection were chanting in unison while the 6 arms pointed a finger each at the suit of devilish armor at the same time. 6 pillars of golden light immediately surged forth, all of which struck the suit of purple armor. An astonishing scene then ensued. After being struck by the golden light, the suit of purple devilish armor rotated on the spot and disappeared. In the next instant, black qi swirled around the golden projection, and the purple armor somehow ended up on the projection's body. In the instant that the projection donned the suit of armor, its aura swelled to several times its original power. At the same time, black qi surged forth from its body, completely inundating the projection under a vast expanse of devilish qi. Han Li was ecstatic to see this. From this, he was able to deduce that the suit of armor hadn't lost all of its spiritual nature, and was thus able to be used by his Provenance True Devil Arts. It was no wonder that this is the case. After all, the Provenance True Devil Arts was a mysterious devilish cultivation art that originated from the Elder Devil realm in the first place. Even though Elder Devils were vastly different from heavenly devilish monarchs, both drew on true devilish qi as their essential source of power. Of course, if the suit of armor were completely unscathed with its spiritual nature fully intact, or if its owner was still alive, then it would be close to impossible for him to take it for himself. Han Li nodded with a wistful expression as he said, "This suit of armor does indeed suit me very well, but it's a pity that it's already been damaged. Otherwise..." The woman was quite stunned by the sight of the golden projection that Han Li had conjured up, but her expression remained calm as she replied, "If this suit of armor hadn't been damaged, then it most likely wouldn't have fallen into my hands. However, if you're willing to pay the price, then I have a way to repair it. At the very least, The suit of armor will be able to recover 20% to 30% of its former power. You can repair this suit of armor? Oh, I almost forgot that you were a crystal being, so repairing this armor certainly wouldn't be beyond your capabilities. What's this price that you're referring to? Also, how much do you plan to sell this suit of armor to me for? Han Li asked with a smile. Following a brief pause for contemplation, the woman replied, "This item should be a priceless treasure, but it's a pity that it's a suit of devilish armor, so it can't be used by anyone who's not a devilish cultivator. Unfortunately, devilish cultivators have always been quite rare on Thunder Continent, and it's the first time I've ever seen a devilish cultivator of your cultivation base. Otherwise, this armor would have most likely have been sold already. How about this? If you have any precious materials, ingredients, pills, or medicines, bring them all out and thrown in a few top-grade spirit stones as well. If your offer is satisfactory, I can consider selling the armor to you." It's that simple. Han Li was rather surprised to hear her answer. The conditions she was proposing were far too simple considering what was being offered in exchange. The woman merely smiled and provided no response. "Can you tell me how you're going to repair this suit of armor first?" Instead of immediately accepting the offer, Han Li suddenly changed the subject. A slightly hesitant look appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this, but she heaved a faint sigh in the end, and replied, "Repairing the armor is actually quite simple. As long as you have sufficient devilish cores, I'll be able to easily repair it." "Devilish cores? What are those?" Han Li asked with furrowed brows. This was the first time that he had heard of such a thing. Devilish cores are the inner cores of high-grade devilish beasts. If we want to repair this suit of armor, it would at least require hundreds of devilish cores, all of which would have to be from upper-race devilish beasts. One of those devilish cores will act as the main material to repair the armor, and the higher the grade of that core, the better. Ideally, we'd use the inner core of a holy-grade devilish beast to serve that purpose, the woman said with a solemn look on her face. "Surely you jest, fellow Daoist. Where am I going to find so many high-grade devilish cores? And you're asking me to secure the inner core of a holy-grade devilish beast as well? Why does it feel like repairing this suit of armor will cost far more than what it takes to purchase it? You're not swindling me for an ulterior motive, are you?" Han Li asked with a cold expression. The crystal woman seemed to have anticipated Han Li's reaction, and her expression remained calm as she said, "You're wrongfully accusing me here, senior. The enhancement the suit of armor will receive after being repaired is almost entirely dependent on the devilish core that is to be used as the main material. I can still repair it using devilish cores of a lower caliber, but the effect will be severely lackluster in comparison. If we were to use a holy-grade devilish core as the main material, the enhancement effect would at least be increased by twofold to threefold compared to if a lower-grade devilish core were to be used. If you want the best, then you naturally have to pay a high price. I have two avenues through which you can potentially secure a holy-grade devilish core, and I can disclose both of them to you if you're interested." Chapter 1588, Golden Devil Mountain Ranges. Two potential avenues? Go ahead, Han Li prompted. 3 months from now, the Lucky Cloud auction house of Cloud City will be selling a holy race-thorned devilish beast inner core as one of their auction items. From what I've heard, that devilish core is extremely rare, and even some of the holy race beings in the city have set their eyes on it, the woman disclosed in a slow voice. Han Li's brows furrowed upon hearing this. He did indeed possess considerable wealth, but he certainly wouldn't be confident that his wealth could exceed that of body integration stage beings. Those old monsters had all lived for tens of thousands of years, and the wealth they've accumulated during this time was most definitely quite staggering. Of course, if he exchanged all of the spirit medicines and materials he was carrying into spirit stones, he'd be able to keep up in the bidding with all those old monsters. But he was alone in an unfamiliar place, so it certainly wouldn't be wise to flaunt his wealth in such a blatant manner. If he were to do so, he'd most likely be singled out as a target even before he could purchase the devilish core. He didn't want to draw trouble to himself, and with that in mind, he quickly shook his head as he replied, "If there are going to be holy race beings participating in the bidding, then there's no way I'll be able to outbid them, so that won't work. Oh, in that case, we'll have to take the Second Avenue. You must be quite new here in Cloud City, right, Xianxia? Have you heard of the Golden Devil Mountain Ranges? The woman asked with a smile. I know that such a place exists, but I don't really know anything about it, Han Li replied in a truthful manner. It's not unusual for you to have limited knowledge about that place. It only appeared in the past 10,000 years, and very few people outside of Cloud City are aware of its existence. Allow me to tell you about it in greater detail, the woman chuckled. Then I'll have to trouble you to enlighten me, fellow Daoist. Han Li nodded in response as the map he'd purchased earlier surfaced in his mind. The Golden Devil Mountain Ranges was none other than one of the landmarks annotated on the map. Approximately 10,000 years ago, a spatial storm suddenly appeared on a stretch of barren land about a month's travel away from Cloud City. For some reason, a set of black mountain ranges emerged in the area in the aftermath of the spatial storm. The mountain ranges were entirely enshrouded under dense devilish chi, and the space above it was extremely unstable with spatial rifts popping up quite regularly. Vast amounts of devilish chi surged from these spatial rifts, and some high-grade devilish beast also emerged from them, including some holy-grade devilish beasts. Within a short span of time, the area in a radius of several millions of kilometers around the mountain ranges had been transformed into a devilish realm, and this area continued to expand. This incident eventually drew the attention of the holy race beings in our heavenly cloud races, and several holy race beings of the 6th and 7th tiers were deployed to the area, combing their powers to kill most of the holy-grade devilish beasts that had appeared there. After that, they ventured into the center of the mountain ranges to try and put an end to everything, the woman recounted with a solemn expression. Han Li's heart stirred as soon as the woman mentioned the vast amounts of devilish chi that had surged out of the spatial rifts, and he almost instantly thought back to the infernal river that he'd encountered back in the flying spirit race. The woman suddenly sighed at this moment before continuing. No one knows what those holy race beings encountered in the mountain ranges, but they stayed there for half a year before finally returning. After that, they issued an order to completely seal off the area using a restriction, leaving only a single entrance. They then sent news back to the heavenly cloud races, informing everyone that the matter had been resolved, and that there will no longer be any more devilish chi or devilish beasts emerging from the spatial rifts. They said that the demonic area was only going to maintain its current size and spread no further, but at the same time, they didn't allow any holy race beings to enter the area. Strangely enough, those with cultivation bases inferior to that of holy race beings were permitted to enter the area to kill the devilish beasts there, as well as to scour for inner cores and precious materials. However, there was only 1 month of each year during which the area could be accessed, and beings couldn't stay in there for a month at a time. After that, they'll have to leave the area, and as soon as the month passes, the exit will be closed. With the powerful devilish chi there, even devilish cultivators won't be able to stay in there for too long. Otherwise, they'll most definitely undergo devilification and turn into mindless devilish beings. At the same time, it really is a good place to secure precious materials that could be exchanged for spirit stones. So during the first few years, large numbers of high-grade beings would flock to the mountain ranges during the designated months. However, after a while, those numbers slowly dwindled, and at present, almost no one dares to enter the area anymore. Why's that? Han Li asked with a curious look on his face. The rate of deaths and casualties is simply far too high. Those who can return from the mountain ranges do indeed return with bountiful rewards, but only around 80% to 90% of beings return each year. During the first few years, this was not enough to deter adventurers, but this trend continued year after year. Even though large numbers of devilish beasts were being slain each year, the number of high-grade devilish beasts in there never seemed to dwindle, so of course everyone grew to fear the place. Not only are there countless high-grade devilish beasts in the devilish area, there are even a few holy-grade devilish beasts in there. Most of the time, they reside at the center of the mountain ranges, but if one were to encounter such a devilish beast, they were as good as dead. Truth be told, those who enter the mountain ranges don't even know if they're the ones hunting the devilish beasts or if they're the prey being hunted instead. Thankfully, the more powerful the devilish beast, the deeper they reside in the mountain ranges, so it's not easy to encounter them on the outskirts of the R. Otherwise, no one would dare to go in at all. As such, the Golden Devil Mountain Ranges gradually became a place that people loved to hate, the Crystal Woman explained with a smile. Have you told me all this because you want me to enter the area and kill the holograde devilish beasts in there? Han Li asked as he stroked his chin. His expression remained unchanged, but he'd already made up his mind. If this woman really were deranged enough to make such a suggestion, then he'd immediately depart from this place. The heavenly devilish armor was indeed very useful to him, but it certainly wasn't something that was worth risking his life for. The woman shook her head with a smile before replying, "The Golden Devil mountain ranges are extremely perilous, so I certainly wouldn't make such a suggestion. However, I was indeed hoping that you'd be able to obtain the devilish cores of one of the holograde devilish beasts in that area." "What do you mean?" Han Li asked with a perplexed expression. "From what I heard, a holograde devilish beast forced its way out of the Golden Devil mountain ranges over 100 years ago for some reason, then attacked several of the nearby towns. Several holy race beings were alerted to its rampage, and they combined their powers to severely wound the beast, but it managed to get away in the end. I just so happen to know where this devilish beast is lurking," the woman said with a mysterious look in her eyes, and Han Li was quite stunned by this information. "Is that true?" Han Li took a deep breath as he adopted a serious expression. "I am most definitely telling the truth. The beast was severely wounded over a century ago, and it snuck back into an obscure location on the outskirts of the Golden Devil mountain ranges. It's been in hibernation ever since, and it possesses less than a tenth of its original powers. The only obstacle here is that it's created a devilish chi barrier, and only high-grade devilish cultivators who are also capable of controlling devilish chi can infiltrate through the barrier. Otherwise, any other being that comes into contact with the barrier will instantly rouse the beast from its slumber. That's why I haven't been able to do anything to it despite the fact that I've known its location all along. The price that I'm asking for to repair this suit of armor is the devilish beast's body, from which many materials can be derived. Of course, I'll be using its inner core as the main material to facilitate the armor's repair. If you think this is a fair arrangement, then I'll disclose the beast's location to you." The crystal woman put on a serious expression as she finally disclosed her condition. A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face, and only after a lengthy silence did he finally ask, "Are you sure the beast is only lurking on the outskirts of the mountain ranges and possesses less than a tenth of its original powers? How did you manage to obtain this information?" Han Li was naturally quite tempted by the woman's proposal, but this was quite an important matter, so he had to get some answers first. "I can assure you that the information I have is accurate. I can see that you still have some doubts, so I'll show you something as proof." Rather than being disheartened by Han Li's questions, the woman was instead quite pleased, as this showed that Han Li was seriously contemplating her offer. Thus, she raised a hand, and a plume of black smoke suddenly shot forth from within her sleeve, then converged to form an object that hovered above her head. It was a fist-sized black bird with a fiery red beak and a pair of shimmering golden eyes. "That's a devilish smoke bird." Han Li immediately identified this bird, and he was initially quite stunned before coming to a realization. "Indeed. This is one of the extremely rare types of devilish beasts that I've been able to tame. It has no offensive prowess, but it's extremely proficient in searching for targets and traveling in a stealthy manner. I can even permanently bestow upon it a wisp of my spiritual sense to control it, and it's all thanks to this bird's observations that I was able to learn the condition and whereabouts of the wounded beast," the woman explained with a smile. "With such a bird under your control, I have no further suspicions. However, I must ask you some things. How was this holograde devilish beast able to escape with its life in the face of multiple holy race beings? Does it possess a high cultivation base even among holograde devilish beasts, or does it possess powers that outstrip its cultivation base? On top of that, would you be able to tell me what species of devilish beast it is?" Han Li nodded before delving into a detailed line of questioning. "I didn't witness the battle between the beast and the holy race beings, but apparently, it's comparable to a second or third tier holy race being. Of course, I've only heard this from others, so the information may or may not be accurate. As for what kind of devilish beast this is, it's rather hard to say, but it seems to be similar to the legendary true spirit, the giant mountain ape. Perhaps it possesses that true spirit's bloodline," the woman replied. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. A thought suddenly seemed to occur to the woman at that moment, and she raised a hand to toss a stone tablet at Han Li as she said, "I just so happen to have an image of the beast. You can have a look at it, senior." Han Li caught the stone tablet before pressing it against his forehead and injecting his spiritual sense into it. After a short while, Han Li lowered his hand with a contemplative look in his eyes, and mused, "It really does bear a resemblance to a giant mountain ape." "I've already said everything there is to say. Have you made a decision yet, Senior?" The woman turned to Han Li with a hint of anticipation in her eyes. However, Han Li merely smiled and asked her something that caught her a little off guard. "May I ask your name, fellow Daoist?" The crystal woman faltered slightly before smiling as she replied, "You can call me Xianxia, Senior." Chapter 1589. Sentient Puppet. Xianxia, Han Li murmured to himself before nodding as he said, "Seeing as I don't have to venture deep into the Golden Devil mountain ranges and the holograde devilish beast has been severely debilitated, this is a risk worth taking. However, let me make this clear. If things aren't as you say they are, or I find that the undertaking is somehow riskier than I expected for whatever reason, I'll bail out right away. Also, on the day that the mountain ranges open up, I want you to come with me in person and lead the way. Lastly, if the holograde devilish beast really does possess the bloodline of a giant mountain ape, you have to split half of its true spirit blood with me. If you don't agree to any of the aforementioned conditions, then the deal is off." Han Li adopted quite a serious expression as he spoke. Xianxia contemplated his conditions momentarily before nodding as she replied, "All right, I accept those conditions." A smile appeared on Han Li's face in response to her prompt agreement. Thus, he spoke no further as he flicked his wrist, and a storage bracelet instantly flew out of his sleeve. He pointed a finger at the bracelet, and a swath of azure light instantly swept forth, following which a dozen or so vials and boxes of different sizes and materials abruptly appeared in mid-air. On top of that, there were also several tens of top-grade spirit stones that were shimmering with lights of different colors. At your current cultivation base, these pills and medicines should be enough to support your cultivation until the low and intermediate tiers of the upper race, and they can even assist you in breaking through bottlenecks. However, their effectiveness will differ from person to person. As for these materials, I expended a lot of effort to collect them. Take a look and see if they're to your liking, Han Li said in an indifferent voice. Many of these pills had been consumed by Han Li in the past, and he'd even brought out his remaining 2 vials of true toad liquid, so he wasn't afraid that the woman would be discontent with his offering. As for the materials, those were of a slightly lower caliber, but they had been obtained from the 2 spatial tempering stage demon beasts that he'd slain back in the Flame Coral Islands, so they were also extremely precious and rare. In contrast, the top-grade spirit stones really had been quite difficult to come by, even for him, and bringing out so many at once was far from a pleasant experience for him. As expected, after examining the pills and materials, a hint of elation appeared on the woman's face. "All of these items are quite precious, and along with those top-grade spirit stones, there's certainly enough to exchange for this suit of devilish armor," the woman said with a smile as she stowed everything away. "I'm glad to hear that. We have a deal, then. I'll leave you with a myriad distance talisman, and I won't be leaving Cloud City anytime soon. When the Golden Devil mountain ranges are about to open up, you can inform me using that talisman." Han Li smiled as azure light flashed from his storage bracelet at his behest, following which a palm-sized jade badge flew out from within. The storage bracelet then flew back as a streak of azure light, fitting itself around Han Li's wrist in a flash. "All right, I'll remember to use the talisman when the time comes." The crystal woman nodded with a smile as she caught the jade badge. Han Li didn't say anything further as he made a hand seal and began to chant something. The golden projection and the suit of purple armor that it was wearing both disappeared in the flash, and at the same time, the nascent soul within Han Li's Dantian smiled as a purple suit of armor appeared over its chubby body. The rest of the process was quite simple. The woman teleported the 2 of them back to the shop using her formation plate, and Han Li immediately departed. He then visited some other shops that caught his interest, most of which were specialty shops that sold items like materials, treasures, and talismans. He did manage to find some noteworthy things in those shops as well, but of course, none of them could compare with the heavenly devilish armor he'd just obtained. Han Li stayed on this street for an entire day, and he only hailed a beast-drawn carriage to return to the inn after night had already fallen. In the half a month or so after that, Han Li did nothing aside from visiting these streets and hundreds of shops in Cloud City. Thus, he managed to gain a rough understanding of the various places across the city. At night, Xianxia would occasionally visit him for a conversation. During this period of time, the city appeared to be on high alert, but its inhabitants were actually quite relaxed, seemingly completely unfazed by the fact that the city was potentially going to come under attack soon. Perhaps this was due to the fact that they were already accustomed to attacks from the Jiao Kai race, or perhaps they simply didn't think that the army of the Jiao Kai race would make it to Cloud City. On this day, Han Li emerged from the inn as usual, but he didn't visit any more shops. Instead, he hailed a carriage and asked the driver to take him to Radiant Cloud Mountain. The beast-drawn carriage immediately began to race down the street, and it had to travel through most of Cloud City before finally arriving at the designated destination. Han Li disembarked from the carriage and looked up at the colossal mountain before him through narrowed eyes. This was a lush mountain that was over 30,000 feet tall with a burst of pure spiritual qi emanating from it. It seemed to possess a top-grade spirit vein. Han Li looked around to find that there were 7 mountains of a similar size in the nearby area, and these 8 mountains formed the renowned 8 Cloud Mountains of Cloud City. It was said that a long time ago, a few unfathomably powerful beings in the city had unleashed extraordinary abilities to forcibly transport these 8 mountains from the ground down below all the way up to Cloud City. They then also captured 8 top-grade spirit veins and placed them into the mountains, thereby creating these 8 spirit mountains that were not inferior to any on the ground below. These 8 spirit mountains were also the only places in Cloud City where outsiders could permanently reside, and there were many cave abodes of different sizes on the mountains. None of these cave abodes were owned by a single being, and all of them were available for rent. Of course, the rent was extremely expensive, and the lease period was based on centuries. Even so, most of the cave abodes on the 8 mountains had been rented out, and there were even instances where demand exceeded supply. The temporary cave abode that Jiao Qianmu had in Cloud City was situated in this radiant cloud mountain. Han Li rose up onto the mountain as a streak of azure light, heading toward the address that Jiao Qianmu had given him. The 8 Cloud Mountains were also the only places in Cloud City where beings were permitted to fly and use magic power. The reason why Han Li had come here was naturally for the so-called sentient puppets that had been promised to him by Jiao Qianmu. During this period of time, Han Li had learned a lot about the myriad ancient race. Even though this race was only ranked somewhere around the middle of the 13 heavenly cloud races, their mastery of puppetry and puppet refinement had reached an incredible degree. It was said that they were one of the 3 races on the Thunder Continent that were most proficient in the art of puppetry. Han Li was initially rather confused as to what these sentient puppets were, but after reading through some relevant tomes and learning about them from Xianxia, he finally understood what they were. These puppets all had to possess deity transformation stage power at a minimum, and they also possessed certain levels of spiritual nature. Even without having to inject spiritual sense into them, these puppets could carry out some simple instructions, so they were quite extraordinary indeed. On top of that, it was said that the spiritual natures of these puppets could evolve given the right conditions, and they could even develop a high level of intelligence. Of course, that was only a rumor. The myriad ancient race had never released an official statement to support or refute this claim, so these sentient puppets were given an extra layer of mystery and intrigue. Even for the myriad ancient race, these sentient puppets were quite difficult to refine, and they weren't sold to outsiders under normal circumstances. The few that did manage to somehow make their way out of the myriad ancient race were all highly sought-after items, and each puppet could be sold for an astronomical sum. Han Li was quite proficient in the art of puppet refinement himself, so he was naturally very intrigued by these extraordinary sentient puppets. Furthermore, he had some other objectives as well, and that was why he had decided to come to this place in person. After flashing through the air a few times as a streak of azure light, Han Li descended onto an obscure location halfway up the mountain. There was an ordinary-looking mountain face not far ahead of him, upon which a stone gate that was several tens of feet tall could be seen. Han Li didn't directly knock on the gate. Instead, he swept a sleeve through the air, and a ball of light flew out from within, then disappeared into the stone gate in a flash. Not long after that, white light flashed from the surface of the stone gate, and it slowly opened of its own accord. Jiao Qianmu emerged from within with a smile on his face, and greeted, "Haha, it really is you, fellow Daoist Han. What took you so long? I've been waiting for quite a few days already." Han Li smiled, and replied, Apologies for the delay. I had some matters to attend to, so I ended up coming a little later than expected. Jiao Qianmu nodded before extending a warm invitation. I see. Come into my cave abode and we'll talk in there. I'd be glad to. Han Li accepted the invitation and strode into the cave abode. Jiao Qianmu's cave abode wasn't very large. After passing through a short passageway, the two of them arrived in a hall that was over 300 feet in size. The decor was quite unique and elegant, with a few shimmering beads embedded onto the roof, along with a table, two smaller side tables, and a few chairs in the room. There was nothing else in the hall aside from that, and even the walls had only been paved with the most ordinary bluestone. Take a seat, fellow Daoist Han, Jiao Qianmu offered after sitting down on the main seat. Han Li nodded before taking a seat beside him. Before even saying anything, Jiao Qianmu suddenly clapped his hands together twice, and footsteps sounded from a side door, thereby drawing Han Li's attention toward that direction. Moments later, a beautiful woman who appeared to be in her 20s emerged into the hall. She was wearing a yellow palatial dress and was holding a long wooden box as she strode into the room in an elegant manner. The woman made her way to the center of the hall, then placed the wooden box in her hands onto the side table in front of Han Li before standing off to the side in a respectful manner. Han Li merely took a cursory glance at the wooden box before turning his attention to the woman with a peculiar look in his narrowed eyes. Has my servant caught your eye, fellow Daoist Han? If you like her, how about I give her to you? Jiao Qianmu chuckled upon seeing this. Chapter 1590. New Puppet. It's not that. I was marveling at just how extraordinary sentient puppets truly are. If it weren't for the fact that I'm also proficient in puppetry myself, I'd be fooled into thinking that this sentient puppet was an actual person. The spiritual pressure emanating from her body is remarkably similar to that of a normal cultivator, Han Li praised with a smile on his face. Not only was Jiao Qianmu not dejected upon hearing this, he burst into hearty laughter instead. Ha ha, so you've figured it out, fellow Daoist Han. Teske, among the fellow Taoists who have visited my cave abode, you are definitely the first below the holy race to discover that this servant of mine is only a puppet. I refined this puppet myself many years ago, and it swindled many of my good friends since then. He seemed to be quite impressed that Han Li had been able to identify his servant as a puppet. You're far too kind, fellow Daoist Jiao. From the looks of it, this sentient puppet isn't very powerful, but it certainly does greatly resemble a human, Han Li mused with a smile as he appraised the puppet, which was virtually identical to a real human being. You do indeed have a brilliant discerning eye, brother Han. This is the first sentient puppet that I've ever refined, and it's only a third-tier upper race puppet. I decided to solely pursue crafting a sentient puppet with the most spiritual nature at the time, but unfortunately, even after I've nurtured the puppet for so long, its spiritual nature hasn't been enhanced in the slightest. Jiao Qianmu sighed as he turned toward the servant with a wistful look on his face. At this moment, the servant suddenly turned and smiled at Jiao Qianmu in an extremely humanized manner, but its smile then instantly faded as it adopted a blank and wooden expression again. Han Li was a little speechless upon seeing this. Have a look at the sentient puppet in the box and see if you're happy with it, brother Han, Jiao Qianmu prompted after withdrawing his gaze from his servant. All right, then I'll go ahead. Han Li nodded as he swept a sleeve over the table, and a swath of azure light surged forth. The long wooden box opened following a crisp crack, revealing the item within. Han Li focused his gaze on the item, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. There was a white snake that was around a foot in length sitting inside the box. Its entire body was glittering and translucent, with a layer of white spiritual light radiating from it. This is a new type of sentient puppet that I refined not long ago. It possesses a cultivation base that's roughly the same as yours at around the 7th tier of the upper race, but even though it's not all that powerful, it possesses two forms. If it weren't for the fact that you've saved my life, I really wouldn't be willing to part with this part, Jiao Qianmu said with a slightly forlorn look in his eyes. Two forms. Han Li was rather surprised to hear this. Indeed. Even though I haven't infused my blood essence into it to perform a master recognition ceremony, I can still show you its basic abilities. Jiao Qianmu made a hand seal as he spoke, then pointed a finger toward the wooden box in Han Li's hands. A beam of white light immediately shot forth from his fingertip, disappearing into the white snake's body in a flash. Spiritual light flashed, and the motionless snake suddenly sprang to life. Brilliant white light erupted from its body, and it transformed into a streak of white light as it flew out of the wooden box. Immediately thereafter, it swelled drastically to become a white python that was several tens of feet in length before circling around in the air. The python had a pair of crimson eyes while its body was entirely covered in shimmering white scales. A violent aura was emanating from the puppet, and it really did seem to be completely identical to a real giant python. All of a sudden, Jiao Qianmu let loose a low cry and made a hand seal before casting another incantation seal onto the snake. The giant python puppet shuddered as a result before curling up into a ball. Another flash of brilliant white light radiated forth, following which the white python transformed into a beautiful white-robed woman. In its female human form, the puppet wore a slightly lost expression as it hovered motionlessly in mid-air. This sentient puppet can assist you in battle and also be used as a servant in your cave abode. Its only flaw is that it requires several times the number of spirit stones to function compared to other sentient puppets. On top of that, most of the puppet's body is constructed from glacial crystal iron, so it can only be powered by the extremely rare ice attribute spirit stones. If you want to use the puppet, you'll have to prepare to expend a lot of spirit stones on it in the future, Jiao Qianmu explained. Han Li stared at the white-robed woman hovering in mid-air for a long while before smiling as he replied, "Ice attribute spirit stones are indeed quite rare, but I do have some in my collection, so I'd be more than happy to take the puppet." He, I'm glad that you're pleased with the puppet, Brother Han. You'll only need to use a drop of your blood essence to conduct a master recognition ceremony, and no one else will be able to use the puppet aside from yourself, Jiao Qianmu said with a smile before making a hand seal, then pointing a finger at the puppet. The white-robed woman immediately swayed before flying toward Han Li as a ball of white light. It then transformed into a white snake that slowly descended into the box again. At the same time, Han Li rustled a sleeve, and a burst of azure light swept past to place the lid back onto the box. Fellow Daoist Jiao, from the sounds of it, all of these sentient puppets were created by you, so you must be an extremely well-established puppet refinement master. I also have some interesting puppets that were given to me by someone else. Would you like to see them? Han Li turned to Jiao Qianmu with a smile. Oh, I'd love to see them. Jiao Qianmu seemed to be genuinely excited at the prospect of witnessing a new type of puppets. Han Li smiled as he flipped his hand over, and a jade box appeared over his palm. The box was shimmering with spiritual light, and there were even a few restriction talismans plastered onto it. After peeling off the talismans, Han Li laid a hand onto the lid of the box, and it came flying off of its own accord, following which several tens of humanoid puppets flew out from within, each of which was around a foot in size. These were none other than the spirit servants that Han Li had received from Demon Monarch Di Shui. As soon as these humanoid puppets flew to the center of the hall, a cloud of 5-colored mist suddenly erupted forth. The mist then faded, and 12 seductive gorgeous women in 5-colored dresses appeared in the hall. At the same time, 24 handsome young men appeared on either side of the hall, and all of them were holding different types of musical instruments as they sat in a cross-legged manner. Han Li hadn't cast any incantation seals, but a delightful captivating symphony immediately rang out within the room. The beautiful women also began to dance along to the music. Their 5-colored dresses fluttered as they flaunted their slender figures, and a peculiar fragrant aroma wafted through the air. Jiao Qianmu's eyes abruptly widened as soon as those humanoid puppets appeared, and he stared intently at them with rapt focus in his eyes. After a long while, the captivating music drew to a halt, and the 12 female dancers also stood still on the spot with their hands by their sides. They are indeed quite interesting. The spiritual sense within these puppets doesn't belong to you, does it, fellow Daoist Han? Jiao Qianmu asked with an intrigued look on his face. So you've noticed that as well. These puppets are known as spirit servants, and they're half-spirit half-object entities. They're different from sentient puppets in that they're refined from infusing a type of spirit body into a puppet. However, they function much the same as sentient puppets in that they have a certain, albeit limited, degree of autonomy, and there's no way to further enhance their spiritual nature after they've been refined, Han Li explained with a smile. An elated look appeared on Jiao Qianmu's face upon hearing this, and he immediately asked, "I've thought of trying to fuse spirit bodies and puppets as one, and I've conducted several experiments to try and make that a reality, but none of them have succeeded. What kind of spirit body was infused into these spirit servants? I didn't refine these spirit servants myself, so I'm not too sure what kind of spirit bodies were infused into them. However, I'm sure that you'll be able to separate the spirit bodies from these puppets and identify them," Han Li replied as he stroked his chin. "That's true. Wait, you're giving these puppets to me?" Jiao Qianmu nodded in response before suddenly realizing what Han Li was implying. "These spirit servants are quite interesting, but they serve no purpose for me. In contrast, you have brilliant mastery in the art of puppetry, so perhaps you'll be able to make good use of them to further better yourself," Han Li said in a calm manner. "These spirit servants are indeed extremely useful to me, but I can't just accept such a precious gift from you. How about this? I have some wealth on my hands at the moment, so I'll purchase them from you instead," Jiao Qianmu insisted as he shook his head. "If you really want to offer me something in return, then I have a few questions to ask you. If you can answer those questions, I'd be more than satisfied." Han Li finally disclosed his objective. Jiao Qianmu faltered upon hearing this before responding in a cautious manner. "Questions? Feel free to ask me anything, Brother Han. However, if what you're asking has anything to do with confidential information in our 13 heavenly cloud races, then forgive me for not being able to answer them. Of course, my questions definitely won't be related to any sensitive subjects," Han Li assured with a smile. Jiao Qianmu's expression eased upon hearing this, and he nodded as he said, "Then go ahead, Brother Han. During the past few days, I heard from someone that there seems to be a teleportation formation capable of facilitating teleportation between continents in the heavenly cloud races. Is that true? If so, which race is it being controlled by?"
Xianxia.
Jiao Qianmu was clearly rather taken aback by Han Li's question, and he relaxed even further as he replied, "There is indeed such a teleportation formation, but it's not being controlled by any single race. Instead, it belongs to several races among our 13 heavenly cloud races." "Which races do the teleportation formation belong to?"
Xianxia.
"Due to the fact that the teleportation formation needs to be kept in good condition, it's often serviced, and that's taken care of by the crystal race, the stone cocoon race, the multi-hand race, and our myriad ancient race. Fellow Daoist Han, are you interested in the teleportation formation itself, or are you interested in using it?" Jiao Qianmu asked with a thoughtful expression on his face.